Good day, writers. Welcome to the Writer's Room. My name is Jordan. Today, we're looking at 5 common writing mistakes and some ways you might be able to avoid them. Without any further ado, let's get right into it. Number 1 is cliches. Cliches are words and phrases and ideas that writers have used over and over and over again, so many times that they just don't mean anything anymore. An example of a cliche phrase might be something like, "It's raining cats and dogs." What does that even mean anyway? But beyond just words and phrases, cliches can be things like character stereotypes, i.e. the tall guy that plays basketball or the nerd who wears broken glasses. The more you use cliches, the less original your writing becomes. The entire point of writing is to express your ideas in ways that only you know how to do. So be creative, avoid cliches, and you'll be better off for it. Number 2 is poor grammar and spelling. This one can be kind of intimidating because in the English language especially, spelling and grammar can be really confusing. There are all kinds of crazy rules and exceptions to those rules and words that sound the same but mean completely different things. It's just a lot. Look, I'm not saying you have to have a doctorate in English to be a good writer, but having a good grasp on the basics can really help. You know, things like there, basic punctuation, etc., etc. If this is something you struggle with, it's okay. A lot of writers do. A good way to make sure what you're writing is readable is to have someone you trust look over it. Having a fresh set of eyes look over your work is a great way to make sure easy mistakes don't find their way into your writing. It's always well worth it. Number 3 is overwriting. Overwriting simply means using many words when few will do. Reading something that's overwritten is sort of like listening to this guy's music. While it's certainly impressive that he can play all those fancy licks and tricks and what have you, if that's all he knows how to do, he's not going to hold the attention of an audience for very long. But dude, I'm totally shredding. Sure, but what you're playing really isn't even music. It's just a blindingly fast, incoherent bunch of notes. See, part of being a good musician is knowing how to lay back and find the pocket of the groove, and use dynamics to build an interesting composition. That way, when it is time to rip out a shred-tastic solo, it's all the more effective, and your audience is eagerly anticipating it. Good writing works in the exact same way. Every line of dialogue, every character description, every sentence should be revealing some new and relevant information. For example, if you're writing a scene where 2 characters are having an intense argument in a restaurant, then your writing should focus on building the tension of that argument. You could spend 2 paragraphs describing the delicious slice of pizza on the next table over, but should you? I would argue not. If what you're writing isn't adding any new and relevant information and driving the plot forward, then you don't need it. Just cut it out. Number 4 is no conflict. Your story needs conflict, period. It can be conflict between characters, conflict between a character and nature, a conflict between a character and technology, a conflict between a character and themselves. It just has to be some kind of conflict. You need conflict to drive and advance the plot of your story and allow your characters to grow. Conflict happens in real life, so conflict should happen in your story. Finally, number 5, writing in someone else's voice. This one can be kind of a difficult thing to grasp, so let's look at 2 authors from roughly the same time period in history, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest Hemingway. F. Scott Fitzgerald was known for his flowery, ornate writing style, most notably in The Great Gatsby. I once heard it described as poetry in prose, and I think that's a good way to put it. Fitzgerald wrote a lot about the decadence of American life in the 1920s, so a highly decorated writing style lends itself well to those kinds of stories. Hemingway, on the other hand, was a strong proponent of a minimalist writing style he called the iceberg theory. What Hemingway meant by the iceberg theory is essentially this. Imagine your story as being an iceberg, having 2 distinct layers, one above the water and one below the water. The things above the water are tangible things that you can experience with your senses, things you can see and hear and smell and taste and touch. The things below the water are the less tangible things like underlying themes and character motivations and symbols. Hemingway argues that if you write the things above the water well enough, then you don't even have to write the things below the water, that they'll reveal themselves to your readers. Hemingway also wholeheartedly believed that a piece of writing can be better judged not by what the writer put into it, but by the things they willingly omitted. So, who's better, Fitzgerald or Hemingway? The answer is neither. They're both great. Each author had the specific voice they had because it was the one they were supposed to have. If The Great Gatsby was written by Ernest Hemingway, it would be a completely different novel. And if The Old Man and the Sea was written by Fitzgerald, it'd be a completely different novel. I said all that to say this. You're not capable of writing in someone else's voice better than they can, and they can never write in yours better than you. Disclaimer. I am not a perfect writer. I have made all these mistakes more times than I can even count, but making mistakes and learning from them is how we grow as writers. Author Stephen McCraney put it this way: the master has failed more times than the beginner has even tried. Now that we've nailed down these 5 common writing mistakes, let's do a brief recap. Number 1, cliches. Basically, just do your absolute best to be original. Don't intentionally write things that other writers have written many times before. Number 2, poor grammar and spelling. Get a good grip on the basics and keep easy mistakes out of your writing. Number 3, overwriting. Pare your writing down to only what is necessary. Don't make your readers trudge through miles of unnecessary details and descriptions. Number 4, no conflict. Conflict is an essential component to an interesting story, so don't skip out on conflict. And finally, number 5, writing in someone else's voice. You are you have the voice you have because it's the one you're supposed to have. Trying to write like someone else only makes your writing worse. And thus concludes this episode of The Writer's Room. I genuinely hope it helped you in your writing journey. If you have any questions or comments, or you just want to say hey, please feel free to drop me an email, which is listed in the description box below. Have a fantastic day, and until we meet again, get to writing, will ya? I'll see you next time.